Our final speaker is obsessed with games and believes that games have a huge expressive potential. Read your website.
They do.
So much so that he runs workshops to help others design games. Recently, game designer in residence at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Put your hands together for Matteo Menapace.
Thank you. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about how game design can inform what we do as UX designers. But as Ben said before, we're just as good as the people that we work with, the people that we talk to. So I'd like to start with a shout out to a colleague and a friend who I would really recommend you to check out. Florence, she, in Ali's words, really breathes design in the sense that she does it at a museum where it's really hard to make anything meaningful in a short time. And also she's very critical. She talks critically about designing, so I would recommend you check it out. So, what can a UX practitioner learn from game design? Well, first of all, what is a game? There are many definitions of games, but one that I like is by this guy called Sid Meier, and he talks about games as a series of interesting choices. And by interesting choices, it means things that you do which are not obvious. So, I would like to turn this talk into a sort of game where I've got about 2 hours of stuff that I could talk to, but I would like you to become the players, the ones that make the choices. And another thing that I like about games is that they allow us to create these parallel universes where we can explore, we can immerse ourselves, we can see a different reality. So in a parallel world today, I'm talking about this. I'm talking about what role can a UX designer play in the climate crisis. And the first choice that I'd like you to do is the following. Do you want me to talk about game design, or do you want me to talk about what role you can play in the climate crisis? And if you want to vote for game design, hands up. Okay. Okay. And you want to hear about the role you can play as a UX designer in the climate crisis? Hands up. And I think climate crisis wins, actually. Interesting. Cool. So, that was your first choice. Well done. Second choice is A, B, C, or D. So, imagine that you are in front of a door, in front of 4 doors actually, and you have to choose between which door to open first. You want it to be A, don't look away, hands up. Right, nobody? B, what's the climate anyway? One person. Alright. Tell me a story. That's the majority, I suppose. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. Good. So, I'm from the Italian Alps. This actually is where I grew up. And as you can see, hopefully you agree with me, that's beautiful, right? It's an amazing place. I've been there last month and it was great. It was sunny, it was temperate, we have cleaner air than in London. However, it's not always like that. This is a picture from about the same place 2.5 years ago. This is December 2015. What's missing in that picture? Snow, exactly. So it used to be the case that every year it snows, but it's not the case anymore. So snow is not just about pretty pictures, it's actually something that people that I grew up with rely on because they use it for the irrigation of their fields. And if it's not snowing, they don't have water to irrigate their fields. And that's a bit of a problem. Another problem is that we have glaciers. This is about half an hour from where I grew up. and there's only 20% of them left in my region. And within 20 years, it's going to be none. So this is a picture that was taken last year. In 20 years' time, you won't see any of that. You won't see just rocks. Another thing that happened last year, we had unprecedented windstorms that literally wiped away entire parts of the forest. So the whole forest was obliterated by wind. And this is very unusual. We haven't seen that before. So, however, I went there last month actually, and it was great. I didn't see any of that. But I know that climate change is happening, and it's happening in this sort of paradise on earth where I grew up. So, what I would like you to do now is that awkward thing of turning to the left or to the right, talk to the person next to you, and talk about where did you grow up, and can you see any signs of climate change happening? Does anyone want to share a story about how climate change is affecting the place where you grew up or where your kids are growing up, maybe?
Oh, it's a really pathetic one. I was just saying, I grew up in Teddington, and I was saying that's the epitome of the place where probably people have enough money, there's not huge climate change, people can cope with whatever comes at them. But then I thought of a guy I saw, he's a brand new house, just obviously bought it, and he's got sandbanks in his driveway because it's been built and it's paved all the way down. It's all paved. So as soon as there's any rain, straight down into his brand new house, under the garage door. It's a small thing, but
Yeah.
people are paving their driveways, the water can't get in.
Yeah. People are already starting to build disaster
Yeah.
relief into their luxury apartments and houses. It's happening. Okay. So I told you a story. Now, A, don't look away. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Not quite enough. There's about 50 of you in the audience, so you need to reach at least 12 or 13 to have a chance. B, what's the climate change? What's the climate anyway? 1, 2, 3. Nope. Level 0? Okay. Alright, so that's the first level of possibly many levels to come. So, level 0, I want to talk about the role that you can play as a UX designer in this mess. And I want to start from the role that you can play as an individual. So, as a consumer. And there are things that you probably heard or read about already, such as consume less meat or no meat, fly less, take stock of your consumer habits. And I think those are all very important things to do, especially eating less meat and flying less are things that can make an impact. There are some people that tell you don't have kids. I have quite a few problems with that argument. However, I think that beyond individual actions that you can do, there's also a risk there because it starts to frame climate change or climate action as an individual response, as a consumer response. But I think that we need to look beyond what we do as individuals, as people, and look at what we can do as collective, as a society, or as a group of people that work in the same office, in the same industry, and so on. So looking beyond individual, looking into systemic. And that's level 0. Now, possibly that leads into level 1? Yes? Good. So, now we look at what kind of changes can you do as a group of people that work together, and taking stock of all of that. Because if you do that, you can start multiplying the effect, the change that you can have, the impact that you can have from one person to possibly 10, 100, and so on, and set the examples for other people. So taking stock of your office and your business practices. Does your office, for instance, run on coal? Who's your energy supplier? Do you know that? No? Well, maybe you should find out. Because probably, 80% of energy companies do produce their electricity by burning coal, and maybe you don't agree with that. So, and it's easy to switch. It's really easy to switch, so go and do that research. Another thing that you can do is take stock of your tech infrastructure. So, is your website running on coal? Who's your website provider? What are their eco-credentials? And are you happy with them? And if not, why not? Maybe you could change that. There's an interesting thing that I came across the other day. This is kind of a bit of a leap into the future, but Grow Your Own Cloud is an experiment where people are starting to inject data into plants, into trees. And it's not something that you can buy now, but maybe in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, it could be something that becomes a reality. So the idea of a cloud is a bit problematic in the sense that it looks like it's in the air, but it's not. It's a very energy-intensive physical infrastructure. So the data that you put out there, the services that you build, are also producing a lot of electricity or consuming a lot of electricity. And perhaps in the future we can change that. But for now, you could start thinking about the smaller changes that you can do. Another thing that you can think of is, who do you bank with? What's your business account? Who does your bank lend money to? And are you happy with that? And a couple of examples that I would like to show you. There's one bank which is particularly good at being very strict with who they lend money to and who they don't lend money to, is Triodos. They have current accounts, they have business accounts. If your bank finances oil and gas and the army or those kind of industries, maybe you could switch or think about it. What about your pension? Well, there are companies that invest in good projects. Abundance is a really good one, where you can put your investments, also your pension nest, and it finances regeneration projects, renewable energy projects, and yeah, it's available. There are lots of solutions available, and you can make a difference with your own money and with the money that you have as a company. Another thing that you can take stock of is, who do you work with? So of course there are the bad guys, the oil companies, but there are many other companies that are not so easily identifiable as the bad ones, and those are the ones around the kind of dirty fuels companies. So airlines, car companies, and again, it's not a clear-cut position where you could say, I don't work with those companies if they work in a certain industry, but you have to be honest with yourself about whether the work that you do, the project that you might be hired to do, is greenwashing a certain industry, or if you feel confident that the project that you do could actually change the way that that company operates. So it's a big question, and I'm not saying that I have the answer, that it's a clear-cut answer, but start thinking about what these questions mean and how you can use those questions to start interrogating your own work. So that was level 1 and level 2. Yeah? Or should we try again? Don't look away. Not enough though. Tell me a story. I told you a story already. So we're going back to that. Don't look away. Okay, so now we looked at individual choices, we looked at company level choices. Now we can look at the choices that we can make as a society. And there are a lot of things that we can do, but there's one in particular that I would like to focus on because it's something that could impact all of us. It's the 4-day week. Have you heard about it before? Yeah? So it's a proposal that is gaining quite a lot of momentum at the moment, and all of the arguments that are made for the four-day week are around productivity. So if you work less, there's growing evidence that you are more productive. And I can testify for that because I've been working 4-day week since 2011, and it's been a huge benefit for my own productivity, but also for my own well-being. So I started moving away from what I was doing years ago as a sort of developer, moving more into education, and if I'm here today is also because I've been able to spend more time developing my own skills and my own interest, and started making games and then teaching people how to make games. So it is actually working. I can testify for that personally, but there's also more data that can tell you that. And it's not just that though, there's more new evidence coming out which is about linking the time that people spend working and the time that people spend consuming and creating carbon emissions. So there's one article, all of these things, by the way, all these links, I'm going to give you a short link which has the whole list. So don't worry too much about that. So there's growing evidence that when people work less, they also emit less carbon dioxide because they walk more, they do more leisure trips as opposed to work trips. They have more time to do cooking at home. Essentially, they are less consumers and more humans. So it's a big argument for the 4-day week, in my opinion. And there's also a growing movement of industries that start to wake up to the emergency of the climate crisis. So you might have heard of culturedeclares.org, businessdeclares.co.uk. There's not such a thing as design declares yet, but I'm very glad that Ben mentioned earlier one of his colleagues who... Yeah, there you go. So you've got business declares, climate emergency. You've got culture declares, and designers are also starting to wake up to this. So Design Like There's a Climate Crisis is a really interesting article that has some starting points for how you as a designer, we as designers, can start including future users, future generations, and the whole life cycle of the products that we're working on. And finally, I would like to say that this is quite a new journey for me. I woke up to this thing relatively recently, and what I'm discovering through my own research is that you're not alone. There are a lot of people out there that have already been on the front line for a very long time, and we don't have to do this by ourselves, but something that we can do is put our skills and our network and our space in solidarity and in help to others that are already doing this work. So how can we work with companies or with charities and with groups that are already doing a lot of work in the climate space? Maybe they need a new website, maybe they need a usability research on one of their tools, maybe they need just some space to come together and to meet. So there are a lot of ways in which you can help, and yes, you're not alone. So back to the choice there. Don't look away. Right. There's also what's the climate anyway, which we haven't explored yet, but nobody wants to know. Okay. Don't look away then. So this is a picture of a graffiti that I took quite some time ago near my flat in London, and I decided to make it the lock screen of my phone so that I don't forget that this thing is happening, because we are literally wired to ignore climate change. George Marshall wrote a book about it. There's a site that summarizes what he found out. He went out and did a lot of research, a lot of interviews to both climate scientists and all the way at the end of the other spectrum, the people from the Tea Party in the US, so climate deniers. And what he found, the similarity is that humans tend to ignore things as big, as sort of slow as climate change. So as humans, we tend to respond to urgent and current threats. So if someone's trying to steal something from us, then probably we're going to pay attention to that. But if something bigger, in a sense, is happening, but it's happening at a slower pace and in a way that we don't see or we don't perceive on a daily basis, then we tend to ignore it, we tend to put it off. And what he also found is that even those who have been affected directly by climate disasters, they focus on getting back to normal as opposed to understanding the root causes of what's happened and trying to prevent them from happening again. So there's another reason why we tend to ignore. The other thing is that climate change doesn't have a specific enemy. There is no alien army or someone invading us. In a sense, the enemy is within us. It's actually our own economic system. So it's really hard to take responsibility when we are part of the problem. But that also means that we can be part of the solution. So we tend to play that down. And the way that he sort of concludes this book is that we can learn a lot from religions. So we can learn from the fact that general religions have a common cause, and as a believer, you take a public commitment to that cause, whatever that is. And also religions have a way to talk about shame in a way that implies forgiveness. So that if we go back to this idea that we are all responsible, we're all kind of committing sins that have an impact on the climate every day, but pointing fingers at people and shaming them doesn't really work. Whereas religions, over thousands of years, have figured out ways to include that and to reframe the whole discourse around forgiveness. However, you may not want to go off and do the next belief system or to study religious rituals, but what we can do is we can learn from behavioral psychology. And there is a site, coglode.com, that maybe some of you know. If you don't, go check it out. And I had a fun exercise to wrap up, which is to go to coglode.com, and coglode.com has a list of really interesting studies and behavioral nudges, in a sense, that you can give to users when it comes to reframing the way that they behave. So all of those will be on coglode.com, framed around how can you use this behavior to get people to click more on this or to click on the more expensive choice and so on. But at the same time, if these are human behaviors, then we can use them to nudge them towards climate action. And I think that I'm running out of time now, but if you want to go and do that in your own time, then you're very welcome to. And now, before the end, I would like to put on the... This is the link to the slides and all of the links and more, the ones that you haven't seen in this presentation. There you go. Any questions?
So any questions for Matteo? Very different talk. I guess the question for me is, you touched on there, no one's really done about coming into design. What's the first step of that? If everyone goes back tomorrow and they're looking in their projects, what does that look like when you come in and go, right, let's design like this climate change? What does that mean when we're looking at insurance websites or we're looking at retail websites? What can we do differently? Sorry, on the spot.
No, it's a big question. And to be honest, I don't have an answer. I'm not saying that this has already been solved, But I think going back to this, it's a good starting point, I think, in the sense that one way to go about this is to ask the harder questions. And going back to what Ben was talking about before, the obvious questions that nobody in the room wants to ask, and the questions that may actually hit your bottom line, such as, should we do this work in the first place? Who are our users? Who are we benefiting from? Who are we benefiting by doing this project? And that goes into the second point, which is bringing future thinking into conversations now. So if your users are the stakeholders of a certain business, but the service or the product that you're developing is impacting or is having an impact in the future, those stakeholders should also be brought into the conversation. And maybe the stakeholders should also be the forest or the animals in the forest. There's a really interesting game that I played a few months ago that was developed by a team of people in Denmark, and I can add it to that list of links later, where this was about taking big decisions at a community level, and people had to sort of role play the forest, for instance, or the river, or the squirrels in the forest. And it may sound a bit stupid, but actually to take into account the complexity of what we're doing is not just looking at how can we make more money or how can we increase certain metrics, but what are the metrics that if we include in a more holistic way all the stakeholders, how can we then negotiate all that complexity? So I know that this doesn't really answer the question in a straightforward way, but I think that it's about asking bigger questions.
Matteo Menepace, everyone. Thank you.